Now, I'm going to introduce you to a very interesting character with a very interesting name. He's called Wild Bill. I think we're going to have to find out why he's called Wild Bill. But he runs Vintage Car History on YouTube, a great channel. I'll put a link to it, actually. You must check him out. And you know that I love cars. You know, on BBC Antiques Road Trip, we drive around in cars. And car memorabilia, car-related antiques are really big news in Britain, and I think they're as big, if not bigger, in America. So Bill is from America. He's going to tell us all about him, and he's going to show us some car-related antiques. Bill, great to see you.
Great to see you, David. This is going to be some fun because, as you know, I'm Wild Bill of Vintage Car History. Yes, it's a long story how Wild Bill happened.
Give us a brief synopsis. Did you call yourself Wild Bill, or did someone else call you it?
No, someone else called me that because one of my hobbies amongst vintage car history is writing parody songs and singing them. So I've done, yes, like Weird Al Yankovic, you know, I'll take a song and rewrite it. And I have, for example, on my channel, there's the musical where I took Billy Joel's We Didn't Start the Fire and made a whole parody song about it. The intro to my song, I say to my bride, let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Say to my bride, let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. That's where we will go. Nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile. I wrote the song, I wrote the lyrics, I did the whole thing, I produced it.
I love that introduction. It's really upbeat, I must say. I really do. I never said that. Well, Wild Bill. Of course, you're going to be called Wild Bill if you get it
right because of Weird Al.
And let's talk about classic cars, or in your world, in actual fact, vintage cars, because your passion is the much earlier car than the classic. So that the classic car kind of post Second World War. You're really into the early days of motoring.
Oh, absolutely. And it's just a lifelong passion. You know, I focus primarily on the first 5 decades or so of the automotive industry coming into existence, from the 1880s to the early 1930s.
Right.
And there is so much going on in the history and the people and the inventions and the changes to world culture that happened during that time. And it is fascinating. The drama, the comedy, the sometimes lunacy that happens. And I talk about it. That's what I do. And also how quickly the automotive industry developed as an industry as a whole worldwide. And the memorabilia that's available today reflects that early history especially when you're looking at things from prior to World War I, which is what we're going to be focusing mostly on today.
I mean, that's really the very early days of motoring. Most people watching this who don't know a great deal about vintage cars will think that cars didn't exist pre-World War I, but they'd been around for a couple of decades, hadn't they?
Oh, yeah. The first modern cars started hitting the roads in the early 1880s. And the industry developed very rapidly. In fact, by the mid-1990s, if you wanted to become a car manufacturer, you could go to various different companies. You could buy an engine from these people, a transmission from these guys, a chassis from here, wheels from there, et cetera, and you could put together a car. You could do this by the mid-1890s in Britain, in Europe, and even in the US, although in Britain, it was a little harder until after the Red Flag Act got rid of in 1896.
Well, that's right. And the red flag was, of course, you know, no motor vehicle could travel any quicker than a man could walk. Is that right?
It was a complicated law because Queen Victoria hated cars.
Did she?
Absolutely hated the things. More cars and car makers and models have been named after her than any other person in history. And yet she despised them. She was the champion of the Red Flag Act back in 1865. She didn't want to see these smelly, disgusting machines on her roads. So they were limited outside of any kind of city or town limits to 4 miles an hour.
Wow.
And there had to be 2 people in front of them, one waving a red flag and one ringing a bell to hearken the passing of this machine. And this stayed in effect until 1896. And one of the champions to get rid of it was a man by the name of Harry Lawson, who he began the early first British Motor Syndicate. He was part of Daimler and unfortunately got tied in with Edward Pennington. That was a nasty thing. But he was, in fact, the man that lobbied, one of the people that lobbied Parliament to get rid of it. Finally, it was rescinded, and that is the celebration of that is what started what we now know as the London Brighton Run.
Well, I never knew that. I mean, that's a real classic run for these very vintage cars. And yes. I'll just remind the viewers, in actual fact, that the build does tell some fantastically interesting historical stories. And you know that I have always believed that antiques and history are inextricably linked. If you want to know more about history and cars, go and watch Wild Bill, because he is very, very interesting. But talk about interesting, Bill. Talk about interesting. Show us some interesting antiques.
Okay. Now you could buy an assembled car, and by 1910 there were a lot of companies doing this. That were just a car that you bought from shelves, but even the big companies would often buy components, smaller trinkets that are very collectible in the market. Here is one this is actually the horn, a bulb horn, honk honk, but the honker's gone. Now notice that how the honker looks, it kind of looks like a duck bill.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about this is that this is from 1910, and we don't know who made it because many of the manufacturers of these horns did not put any stamping or identification anywhere on the bell itself. Some did, but others didn't. What they would do is they would make these cheap little horns, and the bulb itself, it was easier to make a mold and cheaper with the brand on the bulb than it was on the brass. And so with the bulb missing, God only knows who made it. We know it was made somewhere in 1908, 1910. But that's just the way that the industry had already developed at that point. The rubber work was easier than the metal work.
So what you're saying then is that manufacturer started producing these horns, these honkers, and selling them to anybody who wanted to make a car. Known manufacturers, new manufacturers. That was how the industry worked at the time. Cottage industry, really.
Yes, very much so. And this is just one example. Probably the biggest example of that would be the Klaxon horn. And
the Klaxon.
Yeah. This is a 1912 Klaxon horn.
Wow.
Now, this is the one that, goes awooga. Now, Klaxon started, I believe, 1908. And they were a manufacturer of horns that, they designed it. In fact, I think it was Miller Hutchinson was the engineer that came up with it. And you'll see on the top of it, it has this electrical post here, because these were run off of 6-volt electrical systems. And you would have a button in your dashboard, or a switch to turn the horn on, and it would go awooga.
That's right. Now, let me just jump in here, because often people talk about hearing a klaxon. In days gone by, maybe my mum and dad would refer to not just a horn as like, it sounded like a klaxon. So they were actually talking about the manufacturer, Klaxon, weren't they?
Klaxon.
Are they an American firm? Or?
Yes, they are. American firm, and also Klaxon is Greek for a siren. And that's why it was named Klaxon. Okay. However, this particular one is special because this was made in 1912, and it was at that time that the U.S. Army decided that they wanted some of these, but they wanted them to actually not just be electrical, but to be operated manually. And this was specifically made for the U.S. Army in 1912. And it still works.
Do that again, because I think I'll just...
You can operate this with the 6-volt electric, but if there's no power...
If you can do that again, but do it closer to your face, because I think that...
That's right at the microphone. Okay, right at the microphone. And the Army wanted these because they wanted it to be able to operate with electricity, but if there was no power and you still had to get the alarm out, it needed to be manually operated. These are actually quite rare.
Okay. Now, that's a real specialist market then, isn't it?
Yes.
I wouldn't know that. Only you know that. You're the only man in the world, Bill.
No, I'm not. There's plenty of others who do. But if you find one like this, particularly from 1912, because these are very collectible. Even one like this.
What's it worth?
Okay, in the American market, you can get these for around $50.
Same
And
here.
the reason,
About the same. Yeah.
because you're going to have people, this is the actual horn in decent shape, and there's going to be people that have a broken horn but a good bulb. And so you put two to two together because God only knows who made it. It's only the bulb that matters. And so, that's why that one's pretty. Now, this guy, being that it is, a pre-World War I military issue, the military people go all over this in a shop, you're looking $500-600.
You see, that's fascinating to me, because I think most people watching this, if they hold it up again, Bill, let's have a look. If most people watching this saw that somewhere in an antique shop, a vintage shop, wouldn't give it a second glance, and it's worth $500 and probably £500 in actual fact, because the currency rate is almost comparable now. Wow. Yeah. And okay, what else have you got?
Okay, this is a fun one. This is a 1914 Boyce Moto meter.
Oh,
now this is a very interesting. These were invented in 1912. I think a German guy produced them. Hermann Schleich, I think was his name. And here was the thing: is that back in that time, a lot of cars, especially the less expensive ones, like the Ford Model T, etc., their engine cooling system didn't have a water pump or a thermostat like others did. They used thermosiphoning, which is basically the idea that water in a closed loop where heat is in one place and cold is in another will naturally circulate, and that's how the engine would cool itself. This was very, very common. However, there was no way to tell if your car was going to overheat until the hoses blew up.
Right. Okay. Well, and then
And then and so that's when this was invented. And
that's basically a temperature gauge that
it is exactly what it is
on our dashboards. But that is attached.
This was on the end of the bonnet or the hood, okay, way out on the end.
Yeah.
Okay. And that thermometer in there would tell you if your engine was going to overheat. Now, these were an aftermarket item. Very few, even after they first came out, most of these were all just either purchased by the owner after they bought the car, or some companies, made them standard and just put them on. But these original Moto meters, and especially the pre-World War ones like this, very sought after. This is in perfect working order, still has the original gaskets.
That's amazing. You'd have to have very good eyesight, I've got to say, to see whether your car was going to blow up or not.
Well, that's yes, but it was either that or wait for it to just go boom. But
this is quite interesting, because you say that goes on the bonnet. We call it a bonnet, you call it a hood. And does this predate the hood bonnet ornamentation, the car mascot? Does it predate those?
No, it does not.
Oh,
okay. Actually, the car mascot came first.
Oh,
and but it was specifically on the more expensive vehicles like your Rolls Royces. I mean, most famously, the Lady of Ecstasy, and I think in 1907, 1908.
Yeah.
But the cars that were the big luxury cars of the time, they had thermostats and water pumps.
Got you. Okay, so they didn't need the thermostat on the
So they didn't need anything like that. And so instead of having just the radiator cap on the end, they would put an ornament on it. The Moto meter, was a practical tool for those cars that didn't have that type of cooling system.
Got you.
And the two merged together.
And so people would be able to tell whether you had an expensive car or a not so expensive car, bearing whether you had your thermostat on the bonnet or not. That's great. I love that. Good bit of social.
Yeah. But these again, very collectible. This right now, it's in beautiful condition. In a at a retail level, we'd be about $350-400 right around there.
But it's a piece of sculpture. I would have that here. I'd put it here, right here, on a table, on a marble stand or a wooden turn stand, and it's just a piece of art. and a great talking point. I love these
Yeah,
things.
I'm afraid I don't have one with me. Just I have this one, but they did actually make the Moto meters, and the Boyces did, with little wings on the side of it to
Oh,
make it dress it up so
wouldn't that
that
be great?
it wouldn't look as much like just a thermometer.
You see, that's interesting because we think today that, cars are, when we were young boys, young kids, we used to bling our cars up, and people still bling them up when they order new cars with big wheels or tinted glass. There's nothing new with blinging cars up. From the very early days of cars, they were getting blinged, weren't they?
Oh yeah, we certainly are.
There's an example: wings on your thermostat. Brilliant.
Got something else here. This is interesting. Now, a lot of manufacturers of specific like clocks and such, when gauges and things would be made by a company then sold them to everybody. And
Yes.
one of those companies is Stuart Warner,
Okay.
and which makes gauges. Now, this is a Stuart Warner manufactured speedometer.
Oh,
that was an option that could be put into a Ford Model T from 1912. Now, you'll notice on the side of it,
yeah,
I'm going to spin this. This has a trip meter.
Okay.
And you can reset it to tell you how many miles you've gone on your particular journey.
Oh,
you have your speedometer here, and then your overall odometer for the car.
Oh, isn't that it's Ford? I was going to say, isn't it very special? It says Ford Special.
It says Ford Special, and here's why. Because Stuart Warner was doing private labeling, which is something that we take for granted here. It happens all the time. You have, you have a factory in China somewhere making the same product and putting 20 different names on it. Okay. Well, that's exactly what Stuart Warner was doing back before World War One.
Oh, I see. Okay, so he was making for other manufacturers, and he made a batch for Ford. So
he made a batch for Ford. He made them for General Motors. He made them for, he made it for Cadillac. He made it for Pope Toledo. He made them for Chalmers. He made them for Humber.
I hope he made a lot of money.
He made a lot of money. These are not only big collectibles, but a lot of people with these antiques will buy these for their particular vehicle. Well, especially absolutely. When you're talking about something like something that's an accessory to a Ford Model T like this.
Yes.
So these, in good working order like this, again, very desirable, $200 to $250, on the American market.
And it's interesting because it was an accessory when new. It was an add-on, and it's an accessory now with the car being vintage. It's an add-on. It's like a box that you tick when buying a new car, and you can do it on a car that's over 100 years old.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Now, of course, you have to fix these cars. Now, this is where this evil-looking device comes in.
Oh, what on earth? That looks like a torture implement.
Well, if this were the Georgians, it probably could, except for the dial there. This is a battery tester. Now, mind you, this is from 1915. Keep in mind that back then, it wasn't until the 1950s that cars started to go away from 6 volts and into 12 volts. And when you're looking at pre-World War I, if you were going to test a battery as a mechanic, the battery was actually manufactured to make a 6-volt battery in 3 sets of 2 cells, of 2-volt cells. As you had a 2-volt cell, a 2-volt cell, and a 2-volt cell. Okay. And you had 3 different cells, and this would test each cell.
Wow. I'm hoping it's got a wooden handle.
It is a wooden handle.
Got you. Yes.
And it's very stocky. And this would tell you whether or not, because the meter on it only goes to 3 volts.
Right.
I don't know how well you can see that.
I can.
But it's because, if it's at 3 volts, again, you're only checking it 2 cells at a time, 2 volts at a time.
Okay.
And that's how that would work. Now, these types of specialty tools, again, from pre-World War I, very collectible. A lot of people, not only just automotive enthusiasts, but tool collectors in general that like antique tools, love this sort of thing. This was around 150, 200 in a quality sale.
But who would know what it was? I can tell you, if I was filming the Antiques Road Trip and somebody showed me that, I would have no idea what it was. But let me ask you this question. We know that the world of, classic cars and vintage cars is full of very eccentric people. Bill.
Mhm.
And they love their old cars. You can't tell me surely that somebody who had a 1915 car would actually use that to test the battery today, would they?
Probably not. It's a
Good.
collectible. I mean, we have, modern meters. I mean, this thing's
Yeah.
a little scary.
Yeah.
And truth to be known, even if you have a 1915 car, chances are you're not running 1915 batteries.
Okay.
You're going to have modern batteries too. I mean, you may have some, available just to say, hey, that's what it looked like, but do you really want to use those things? No.
No. Okay, so that's just a thing. It's just a thing of interest that the car guys out there go mad for. I think that's fantastic.
Something else that's collectible on cars are license plates.
Oh, very much so, yes.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I don't know so much about license plate collecting in Britain and in the continent, but I do know in the US, you have a couple of different types of collections. You have people that just want to get every license plate from every state, no matter how old it is. And then you're going to have those folks that do collect the antique license plates. And even amongst them, many times it's from a particular state or a particular age. Now, license plates themselves can get very valuable. If you go back into the 1890s, early 1900s, when license plates were first starting, initially, pretty much everywhere, the actual letters or numbers on the plate were the initials of the owner of the car. There were so few cars, that's how you could identify it. And oftentimes, they weren't plates like we think of them today. They were often actually embossed leather tags. They could be other, metal, just flaps of tin that have been, pounded with, with the initials in it. But those can be extremely valuable objects. Now, I have an example of a collectible license plate here. Now, this is from the California World's Fair of 1939, a California license plate.
Wow.
This is one of the first commemorative license plates that was produced by any state in the United States. Because this was saying, hey, we're having the World's Fair here.
That's amazing. That's real flag waving for the county.
Well, keep in mind that today, I mean, when we re-register our car, you get a little sticker that you put on it. Okay. Back then you didn't. When you re-registered, you got a new plate. So every car in California got one of these in 1939.
Really? Okay. So they're not maybe as rare as I thought they were going to be.
No, this is not rare whatsoever. I mean, this probably worth about $30.
Oh, I think that's fantastic. You see, that is a piece of art. I'd have that in my kitchen.
Yeah, it's fun, but they're actually plentiful. So they're not rare, but they're cool.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I would overvalue that. In fact, I'd even put it in my bedroom. That's where I'd put it. That's another story.
I do have one more interesting thing to show you.
Go on.
If you don't mind. Now, prior to the Depression, there were gazillions of different car companies out there. And of course, the Depression of 1929, at least in the US, killed a lot of them. But they were selling stocks like crazy just before the Depression hit. And this is, take a look at it. This is a stock certificate from the Pierce-Arrow Motor Car Company, which is dating from May 31st of 1928 for 100 shares.
Interesting. I've never heard of them before.
Right. Pierce-Arrow Motor Car, well, very famous in the US.
Okay.
Okay. And it, and I'm sure you got a photo of it, but it had, it's got that very Art Deco looking text on it, and etc. And here's the thing: is it's a complete fake.
Wow. Why?
Now, here's why. There was this fellow, I don't know his name, but he was out in Philadelphia, I think, around that area back in the early 1970s. He was a printer. And what he decided to do was to make a series of novelty gifts, which were going to be fake stock certificates from companies that did not survive the Depression.
Right.
And this was, and a lot of automotive, he did Pierce-Arrow, he did Peerless, he did Chalmers, he did Winton, and then he did some railroad companies and some other companies. And he printed thousands of these things and sent them off to various boutiques and such as novelty gifts. And you could just fill it out for yourself. It's not real. In fact, this was filled in my name.
Right.
Because it's not real. So it has no intrinsic value. I mean, a real stock certificate, first of all, it wouldn't look like this. Okay, that eagle that you see right here, dead giveaway. That's the signature mark, is that eagle on these fake stock certificates of whatever company they say.
I've never heard of such a thing. How bonkers is that? So he made thousands of these things.
Tens of thousands.
Are they collectible today?
The funny thing is that that's the thing about, even though it's a fraud, I mean, if you have a real stock certificate from that era that was truly issued, I mean, you're looking in the thousands.
Okay.
But these, because, you know, if you're kind of into automotive collectibles or stock certificates, this was kind of a famous fraud. It's worth about $30-40.
But we love famous frauds, don't we? In the world of collecting, we really do. I mean, it's true. There was a company in Paris called Samson who fraudulently copied Meissen pieces in the 19th century. And bizarrely, ironically, some Samson fakes are worth more than the original Meissen. It's a bonkers world. You're bonkers. No wonder you're called Wild Bill. Wild Bill, great to see you. Say goodbye. Bye.
Okay, say goodbye. Peace.